Hello there, BookTube. My name is Daniel. Welcome back to my channel, Guilty Feet. The boy said, my name's Johnny and it might be a sin, but I'll take that bet and you're going to regret because I've got no rhythm. And today I'm going to do another one of sort of author highlights, author spotlights, which is what I'm calling accidental authors. These are authors that I've read somehow at least 3 books by. And today I have an author where I have 8 books by the same author. On at least a very well-known and acclaimed, critically acclaimed, prize-winning author. On at least 2 separate occasions, I've said, I read one of the books, said, well, that's it. I think I'm done with this author. And yet somehow I have 8 books. The person may surprise you or not to learn that I'm talking about is Margaret Atwood. And the first book of Margaret Atwood's I read is The Handmaid's Tale. This is not the edition I read, and I'll tell that story. So, 1987, I finished school and came in London, and came to Israel for 1 year, ended up being 2 years off. Before I came to Israel, I was spending time on kibbutz. A whole bunch of us, a whole group of 40 of us, all came together, young men and women, most of whom I knew growing up, and we all came and spent some time on kibbutz and spent some time in Israel. And before I left, my English teacher from school, who was a huge mentor, remains a huge influence in my reading life, although I haven't seen him since the late 80s, early 90s. I think once went in to see him when I came back from Israel, but influenced me enormously that's a whole stack of books there by Gilchrist, because he used to read them, Gilchrist short stories to us back in the sort of 86, 87 era. And the books that I studied with him and the books that he recommended have stayed with me, and those authors. One of the books that I'd finished school, and he recommended one of the books that I read and take with me. One of them was Middlemarch, which I brought with me to kibbutz and read through it very slowly. And another was this book by an author called Margaret Atwood, called The Handmaid's Tale. Now, Atwood had published a few books before. I don't think she was widely read. She was a Canadian author, which is neither British nor American. It's sort of that in-between thing. But there were a couple of books of short stories, a couple of early books, none of which I ever went back and read. But The Handmaid's Tale was a bit of a publishing sensation. And there was a lot of buzz about it, and this was like a year. It had just come out in paperback, or maybe it had been out in paperback for under a year. And so it was a good recommendation for an 18-year-old going on. I took my copy of The Handmaid's Tale, brought it with me to kibbutz. I read it, and then because of sort of the lack of variety and the lack of choices, this book, my edition of this book, got handed round and read by quite a few other people. And each one had a reaction to it. These were young women and young men, 18, 19 years old, away from home for an extended period, and each one of them had a reaction to it. The one that I'm most familiar with is a very good friend of mine who is now, he's a professor of political science, a long established career in academia, very well respected. I don't think since reading The Handmaid's Tale he's read much other fiction, if any. But he still talks to me about his experience reading The Handmaid's Tale and how it helped shape his understanding of feminism and the world and the patriarchy, and so that always was, and he's brought it up. The reason I say we're still very much in touch, and he mentions it occasionally. So yeah, it was a very resonant and powerful book. I said this is not the edition, so my edition got passed around by a whole bunch of people. I think later on, it's back in London, studying in London in the late 80s, early 90s. I think I lent it to a friend who went on a trip around India, maybe I'm misremembering this, and lost it, and felt so bad that she bought me a new copy. And I'm still in touch with her and her husband, and I still often lend her books. I don't care. And I said, if you lose it, you don't have to buy me a new copy. But this is my unread copy of The Handmaid's Tale, which sits in the library. I also found in it this amazing artifact. This is a vintage reading guide to The Handmaid's Tale. I must have picked this up in a physical store somewhere in, I'm guessing this is UK one. Just let me check if there's any dollar signs in here. I think this is British. Yes, yeah, absolutely British. Published by Vintage. I've just held my camera. Vintage is an imprint of Random House, 20 Vauxhall Bridge Road in London. So I must have picked this up in a store. These kind of things don't exist anymore because of the internet. And this explains a little bit about the story and all sorts of questions for discussion. It's a reading guide, a physical reading guide that I would have picked up, would have been lying, a selection of them at the front of the store. I picked up and thought, I'm going to stick that in my copy of The Handmaid's Tale. So it's in there. Fantastic book. I never watched the TV show, which I know has had a huge influence in BCP. I think this is still from the movie. If I'm, I don't know, maybe not even. Anyway, Handmaid's Tale by Margaret was my first. We'll come back to this in a second. So after that, I was studying literature in London, and the next Margaret Atwood release, and this is the contemporaneous. This was Booker Prize shortlisted. This is Cat's Eye from, I bought this May 1990. So I'm in my first year as a literary student in London, and I would have bought this book, a contemporary novel, 400 pages. I don't remember much about it, but I do remember that I referenced it in my exam at the end of the year. I don't know what the response was. I never did particularly well in my, I wasn't a particularly good student, but I remember thinking it was cool to mention a sort of contemporary literary fiction release, and I think some aspect of it. Elaine Risley, a painter, returns to Toronto and finds herself overwhelmed by her past. Yeah, I remember Elaine, and I remember mentioning her in one of my exams. Then we got a couple of, sort of this mid-career period where Atwood was publishing these great, big, weighty books. So this is from, I'm missing one. I haven't read The Robber Bride, but I have here Alias Grace, which I bought in October 97. So I'm already married, living in Israel by this stage. The last one was I was a student before I was married, before I had a kid. This is me living in Israel, Alias Grace. And then I don't know where The Robber Bride fits in, either before or after Alias Grace, but I have a copy of The Blind Assassin, for which Margaret Atwood won the Booker Prize. So we saw she was shortlisted for Cat's Eye, and she wins for The Blind Assassin, which I remember very fondly. Terrific book. Again, I'd have bought this in Israel. This is from August 01. I would have bought this in the Israeli bookshop that sells books in literature from all over the world, specifically English language books. I would have bought this here with, yeah, don't know, can't remember the circumstances, but I would have read this. So this is 20 years ago. I picked this up and had a terrific experience. A Booker Prize winning novel. I was reading Booker winners. I'd read, this is the fourth Margaret Atwood that I came to, so I was fully on board with Atwood. And then I hit a brick wall, and that brick wall was called Oryx and Craig. Oryx and Craig, I think, subsequently became the first part of a trilogy. This is a sort of giant book club edition. I was part of I joined a book club based in the UK called BOL, Books Online. It was the early days of the internet, so this is from 2003, so 20 years ago. Books Online, bol.co.uk, doesn't exist anymore. It was a book club, so you joined, and then each month you got a selection of books, or you could skip it, or but what they had was brand new releases in this outside sort of paperback fake versions. This doesn't have an ISBN number. This is specifically made for book clubs. It's got a CN number. I'm not sure what that means, but yeah, it tells you what the ISBN would be on the inside, but this edition doesn't have an ISBN number, so this is not quite an airport edition, but it's the size of airport editions. But bol.co.uk was selling them every month, new releases that were new releases in hardback. They were selling these outsized paperbacks for 60% off the hardback price. So if the hardback price was 20 quid, which wasn't for hardback in those days, so they would be selling this for £8, and a new paperback in those times was £6.99, £7.99. So whatever this one, it was this was less. I would have picked this up 60% off for £4 or £5, £6, something like that. So I have a lot of books you see on these shelves, and then BOL collapsed. They could never make any money doing this. But for about 2 or 3 years, I think this is one of, everyone talks about different kickstarting parts of their reading life. BOL was one point where that kind of kickstarted, because I was buying books, sending them to London, pick them up or bring them over. I was doing a lot of traveling for business in those days, and this was, anyway, that's the whole thing of how I got this copy. This book killed me. I just didn't get any of it. It went right over my head. I understand there are 2 subsequent follow-ups which I just didn't bother. This was the point where I said, okay, Ms. Atwood, I think we're done. I've had a good run. Handmaid's Tale still super important, but this, wow, didn't get it, didn't enjoy it, certainly did not want to stick around and read 2 more volumes of this. So we're done with Margaret Atwood, except I was in London, I was in a bookshop, I was buying books, and suddenly I see this book by Margaret Atwood, and it's a collection of short stories, Moral Disorder. Don't remember much about it. It's kind of had no great experience. So this was, when was this? Oryx and Craig was 2003, so 4 years later, April 2007. I must have been in London. I must have bought this lovely it must have been on sale. There's no way I would have paid full hardback prices. Hardback for £15.99. No way, after the experience I had with Oryx and Craig, did I pay £15.99 for this. But anyway, read this, whatever, was kind of okay. It just became another. This is what I'm talking about when I talk about accidental authors. I've gone back and read a book based on the name of the author because I've read other books by the author. That's the only reason why Moral Disorder is in my library. And so the next, I think, couple of books, this may have come before the sequel to Oryx and Craig, and then I was really done until Ms. Atwood comes back and publishes a sequel to The Handmaid's Tale. And so I did, because of my experience with Handmaid's Tale, because of my respect for this author, and the great experience I've had with Alias Grace and The Blind Assassin, I went and I picked up a copy of The Testaments by Margaret Atwood in hardback. I'm now older, with more time and energy to spend on these things. September 2019, and this ended up being the joint winner of the Booker Prize that year, joint with Bernardine Everestow's Girl, Woman, Other. Two of the weakest books on that shortlist, if I remember correctly. I didn't enjoy the Bernardine Everestow book at all. And this, it's not I didn't enjoy The Testaments, it's just not The Handmaid's Tale, and not even attempting to be The Handmaid's Tale. This is much more a response to the global success of the TV show. This is Margaret Atwood in her late 70s, at this point, maybe early 80s, cashing in on that success and saying, okay, everyone who's loved the show, here's a novel to go with it. It's a YA action-packed romp that has very little to do with the world. Not fair. Very little to do with the tension and the moral indignation of The Handmaid's Tale, and much more about here's more of the thing that you think you recognize, and with, I think, a happy ending. So The Testament, it's not a bad book per se, but it's not really, it's no Go Set a Watchman. I didn't read no Go Set a Watchman, but and I did read The Testaments. So I don't think it's an affront to the memory of The Handmaid's Tale. It's more of a sort of sideways bit of peripheral, whatever you want to call it. Not terrible, but not great, and not a great novel in its own right. Certainly not part of the legacy, but you know, it's a serviceable sort of YA action romp. And then, having sort of had, I make it sound like I wasn't, I kind of enjoyed The Testaments. Just, I was okay with the fact that she wasn't trying to strike twice with the lightning. But I picked up, because if you are paying attention to this, I read a fair bit of graphic novels and comic books. So I picked up Angel Catbird, which is a collection of graphic comic books that Margaret Atwood wrote about this character called Angel Catbird, because he's part cat and he flies, which is both the angel and the bird part of it. It could just be called Catbird or Angel Cat, but Angel Catbird is the title. I read this when I had Corona, so a couple of summers ago, and you can go back, I think I made a video about it at the time. This is not just bad, it's egregiously terrible. I mean, nothing to do with the fact that it's just badly written, badly executed. Artwork is terrible. It's a bad comic book, and it's a bad book. I would have picked this up cheap in London. I think in London. Anyway, I think that sale is from, I think I got this in Forbidden Planet one visit one time. Published by Dark Horse, which is one of the premier indie publishers, so not Marvel, DC, or even Image is probably up there. Dark Horse has been running from the late 70s, early 80s, or at least early 80s until now, and they published this. A terrible, and I'm done with Margaret Atwood. This is my accidental author for the day. Love The Handmaid's Tale, Alias Grace, Blind Assassin, terrific. The Testaments, yeah, okay. And then other stuff which is not stayed with me, but somehow I have 8 books by Margaret Atwood, and that's my accidental author for the day. I'd love to hear your experiences. I know some people think Cat's Eye is her greatest book after The Handmaid's Tale, or even before The Handmaid's Tale. I would probably put The Blind Assassin up there, but somehow Ms. Atwood has won 1.5 Booker Prizes, been shortlisted a bunch of times. It's still, you know, a fantastic body of work. Has not won the Nobel, and if I was on the committee, I would say this has disqualified her from taking that. And that's all I have for you today. Thank you. God bless. Bye.